Welcome back to another Alpha Destiny exclusive. In this edition, I'll be comparing a 225 overhead press to a 225 weighted dip. What are the differences in terms of strength, size, injury prevention, all that type of stuff? So before I begin this discussion, I want to hear the input from you, the viewer. What do you notice in terms of differences? And if you could specialize in one area, like if you could have either 225 dip or 225 overhead press, which would you pick? I want to know. And with that said, let's get this video started. So I want to begin by discussing strength development, in particular general strength development, kind of comparing and contrasting both these two movements. So starting off with weighted dip, you have to understand that it's pretty much a horizontal pressing movement. It's not a vertical press like an overhead movement. It's pretty much you're bent forward, and it's kind of mimicking the closed grip bench in a sense. In fact, if we could quantify it, I would say the weighted dip is a cambered bar closed grip bench. And for those who don't know, the cambered bar is like a bent little bar that increases range of motion. So the final position is that you're really stretched out to the limit. That's a weighted dip, okay? Now, the thing is, weighted dips are going to make you very proficient at horizontal pressing as a whole. In fact, if you could do 225 on the weighted dip, you can probably bench 350. And I know that's a strong statement to make, but I'm just stating out the facts. Like a 225-pound weighted dip is a very impressive feat of strength, and it usually yields very strong benching gains. In fact, the times where I've had a lot of plateaus on my bench, whenever I would introduce weighted dips, it would break through like that. And I know tons of great raw powerlifters, including geared, including like just great bench pressers in general, tend to rely on weighted dips. A lot of them do. And we know that it has really good carryover because it's a horizontal pressing movement. It's an extremely deep range of motion. It builds the chest and the shoulders in a very stretched out position, which is crucial for bottom strength for a raw lifter. And therefore, we can assume that getting strong to weighted dip, in this case 225, will yield amazing horizontal pressing strength. Now, the thing is, it's not going to give you great vertical pressing strength. It's just not specific enough. And if it was, then gymnasts would have the best overhead presses. Yet this is not really what we see. Usually a guy with strong weighted dips, he tends to excel at horizontal pressing movements, but not necessarily the overhead press. That's just the nature of the way things go. I mean, I'm not saying he's going to be weak at the overhead press, but it doesn't guarantee a strong overhead press, whereas it does guarantee a strong bench. See my point? Another thing about the weighted dip is that you are building upon relative strength. You do realize that it's a bodyweight movement, right? Your body is moving through space, literally. So the result is that your bodyweight strength is going to increase. If you do bodyweight dips, you're going to be able to do like 50 plus repetitions. If you go do push-ups, it's going to be a joke. If you decide to transition into gymnastic training, so you go on rings, maybe you're trying to learn planches, all these things are going to be supported if you do weighted dips. In fact, you have a much better foundation than a guy who did not do weighted dips if you decide to move into this type of training. So in summary, I would conclude that weighted dips are great for improving your horizontal pressing strength and your relative strength. So that said, let's move on to the overhead press. So the overhead press, as the name implies, is you take a barbell, you press it over your head. So by definition, it is a vertical press. Now, what does it do in terms of strength development? Well, it's going to develop every single vertical press in existence. All the variations is going to go up if you could do 225. You could probably do 100 pounds on the shoulder press. You can probably do like 185 on the Z press. Your numbers are going to be good as a whole. Maybe you could push press 275. The point is, you're going to be good at anything that has to do with vertical press. Line mine press, you know, all that stuff. It will go up if you do vertical presses, which just makes total sense, right? And another thing is that your incline presses are going to go up. In fact, your incline press will shoot up much more if you do overhead press than if you did weighted dips. So that's actually a benefit, if you want to call it that, of the overhead press. It allows you to develop strength in the vertical pressing plane of motion, and it gives you really good strength at your incline presses. Just common sense. Another thing is that it's really good for support work. So if you're doing a lot of snatches or you're a strongman competitor and you gotta be able to hold shit over your head, overhead press is going to give you the strength that you need to sustain that. It's also a kinetic chain movement. So the whole body is being engaged on the overhead press. You gotta squeeze your glutes, contract the core, your feet are planted into the ground. It builds total body explosiveness, and that's very key in all sport. And I know that with the weighted dip, there's a relative strength aspect, which is of course important for sport, but we might be able to argue that the overhead press is more specific in terms of like field athlete type of stuff, you know? So we start to see differences here in terms of strength, right? There's also one significant difference that separates the two, which is the fact that the overhead press, like if you could do a 225-pound overhead press, you can most likely bench 315. That's just the name of the game. I've seen this so many freaking times. Like just go on YouTube right now, type in 225 overhead press. Usually these dudes can at least bench 315 even if they didn't have any bench training. There's typically a very strong correlation between the two. So what does the overhead press guarantee you? Well, it guarantees you a lot of things, my man. It guarantees you strong vertical pressing strength, which the weighted dip does not offer. It guarantees you strong incline pressing strength with the weighted dip will not fully develop, and it also guarantees you a strong horizontal pressing strength foundation, which the weighted dip guarantees, but you have to ask yourself, is it worth the trade-off? To me, what I'm seeing right now, if we compare the two movements, is that a 225-pound weighted dip is going to give you better, slightly better strength gains on the bench press. You're going to have like 50 pounds more on the bench, but you're not going to be as good at vertical pressing and incline movement. So you're missing out on two major movement patterns, if you ask me. And also the weighted dip is giving you the relative strength, whereas the overhead press is not. So those are like the strength differences. If we look at it like that, that's what I seem to observe. So in that case, I mean, I would have to argue that overhead press might be better in terms of general strength. It is what it is. And if I want to know your feedback, do you think this is true? Do you agree with my assessment? Based off the things I just showed you, like, I think you're getting more bang for your buck with the overhead press because you're automatically guaranteed a strong bench, 315. You're guaranteed good incline, good vertical press. I mean, what more could you want? The only thing you're not guaranteed is the relative strength. So you have to ask yourself, is that important to you? If it is, then weighted dips are superior. If not, then maybe overhead press is the way to go because 40 pounds, about like 40, 50 pounds on the bench is not that significant of a difference if we factor in all the other benefits that I just mentioned. Like, there's a lot of benefits, you see. So that said, let's move on to the muscle gaining portion. Let's compare it. So as I described earlier, the weighted dip is pretty much a camber bar close to bench press. It's an extremely deep range of motion. You're maximally stretching out the chest and the shoulders. That said, this is going to have significant hypertrophy effects, most notably the shoulders and the chest. I have noticed, even in myself, that since I started doing these weighted dips, my shoulders have gained 0.5 inches. And mind you, I've already done 225 overhead press, right? So I've already done that, yet I'm not even at a 225 dip. I'm at 215, so I'm 10 pounds below the topic of this video, yet my shoulders increased 0.5 inches. Now, of course, we could factor in gymnastics training in there too, but the point is, the weighted dips made my shoulders get bigger. Why? Through the extreme stretch, the extreme range of motion. If you saw my video, is weighted stretching the key to getting jacked? You'll understand that stretching seems to be a very good driver of muscle hypertrophy. And that's why guys who do weighted dips, they tend to get really good development in their chest and their shoulders. Just look at a male gymnast, you'll be amazed at the development in this region. So the question is the development superior to the overhead press? Well, I'm going to talk about that a bit later. Another thing about the weighted dip is that guys who do it tend to have massive freaking triceps. Look at a guy who does 225, again, YouTube it right now. Tell me if you find a dude with small arms. It's pretty much impossible for the most part because it guarantees you strong triceps. The weighted dip is going to guarantee you strong shoulders, strong chest, strong triceps. It gives you all three to a magnificent extent. In fact, I would say that it's probably even better than the bench press. It's a superior movement overall because you're getting maximum stretch. You could use good weights. It's a fantastic movement, right? Now, the overhead press, in terms of muscle gain, you're going to get a lot of upper chest in there just because of the nature of the movement pattern. In fact, if you look at a low cable crossover, you start here, right? You start low and then you flex at the top. So your upper chest is going to get worked if you do overhead press, whereas the weighted dips is primarily going to be lower chest. So overhead press is going to give you really good upper chest development. That's why mine got so much better this year, like in 2016, you know? It's also going to build the long head of your triceps, simply because of the shoulder flexion. So that's another benefit right there. And of course, if you do a multitude of variations, which you most likely did to get to 225, you're probably going to have better shoulder development. Because if you look at the different movements like behind the neck press and stuff like that, it tends to build the side delts and the rear delts, which is essential in gaining size. So if we look at the comparisons here, it seems to me that the weighted dip is superior for lower chest, while overhead press is better for upper chest. That's what I see. In terms of tricep development, it's debatable because weighted dips is going to ensure strong triceps, big jack strong tris, but overhead press, because it works the long head, which is the medius part, should theoretically also give you strong tris. So it's debatable which one is superior for tricep growth. Although I will say that based off personal anecdote, if I look at guys who are strong weighted dips, they tend to have bigger triceps than the guys who do overhead press. That's just an observation that I've made, but I can't really confirm which one is better for tricep growth. And then again, you know, the shoulder thing, overhead press is probably better because you could use a multitude of different vertical pressing variations, which hits the side and the rear, whereas the weighted dip is mainly front down, right? And then the chest, obviously you're going to get much better chest development doing a weighted dip than a overhead press. However, one thing that I did not mention in this video is injury prevention, which is safer on your shoulders, which is better on your recovery. And for that, I would actually have to say that the 225-pound overhead press is far superior. You see, there's no impingement on the shoulder. You can look up a tutorial by Mark Ripto. He kind of explains that in a lot of detail. Essentially, when you overhead press, the scapula rotates, right? Which means there's no impingement over here, which is a great thing. So if you're doing a lot of overhead pressing, you're never going to get injured. You're only going to feel healthy. You're only going to get stronger. Whereas weighted dips pose a very high risk on the AC joint. You could get seriously snapped the fuck up doing it. There's also the rib cage structure. There's also the limb length factor. If you have too long of arms, too small of a rib cage, you could tear a pec. You could strain a shoulder. You could crack your sternum, which I've had people crack their sternums in the past. So when we look at injury rates, weighted dips are way more dangerous. In fact, if you do weighted dips in the long run, you're almost, like, I wouldn't say guaranteed an injury, but the risk is definitely up there. Whereas overhead press, there really poses no risk. So you can continue to get strong for long periods of time, no real problem. And then we also have to factor in the warming up process. Weighted dips takes a lot longer to warm up. You have to thoroughly do your rotator cuff work, your mobility drills, stuff like that. You gotta take the warm up seriously so you don't snap your shit up. Whereas overhead press, it takes like 225, doesn't take a long time to do. You could go in, empty bar, 95, 135, 185, 225, done. Whereas weighted dips, you gotta do the body weight first, and you gotta do 25, 45, 135, 185, maybe 205, then 225. And trust me, it takes longer when you're doing the fucking weighted dips than the overhead press. So those are really the main differences between the two lifts. I know it's been almost 10 minutes or whatever, but I felt that this video would be interesting and unique. And that's what I've observed, man. I think there are some strength differences, there are some hypertrophy differences. And if you focus, like if you decide to focus your attention to one lift or the other, it's gonna show in your physique. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it was a different style, it was a bit weird, if you will, but I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless. And I want to hear your feedback again. Like, tell me which lift you think is superior. Like, if you can get the standards, if you could choose between 225 dip and 225 overhead press, which would you pick? So that's it. I want to know your feedback, and with that, I will talk to you all next time.